The direction of prayer, known as the Qibla in Islam, is a fundamental aspect of Muslim worship, a unifying orientation towards the Kaaba in Mecca. However, the history of the Qibla is not without its complexities and historical discussions. A significant debate, often resurfacing in both academic and popular discourse, revolves around whether the Kaaba was indeed the original Qibla, or if, for a period, Muslims faced Jerusalem. This question delves deep into the earliest days of Islam, touching upon scriptural interpretations, historical accounts, and the very formation of Muslim identity. Understanding this debate requires a careful examination of various sources, acknowledging the diverse perspectives that have emerged over centuries. The common understanding, widely accepted within the Muslim world, is that the Prophet Muhammad and the early Muslim community initially prayed towards Jerusalem. This period is believed to have lasted for several years, while the Prophet was in Mecca and continued for a number of months after the Hijrah, the migration to Medina. The subsequent change in Qibla towards the Kaaba in Mecca is seen as a divinely ordained event, marking a pivotal moment in the establishment of a distinct Islamic religious practice. Yet this narrative is not monolithic, and some historians and Quranic commentators have presented alternative viewpoints, suggesting a more intricate history than is commonly portrayed, adding layers of intrigue to this crucial element of Islamic ritual. The debate itself is not a recent phenomenon. Early Islamic scholars and historians grappled with differing narrations and interpretations regarding the Qibla. These discussions were often rooted in the analysis of Quranic verses, hadith, sayings, and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and historical reports passed down through generations. The nuances within these sources have allowed for a spectrum of opinions, some of which challenge the straightforward narrative of a simple switch from Jerusalem to Mecca. These alternative perspectives are not necessarily aimed at undermining the sanctity of either site, but rather seek a more granular understanding of the historical and cultural developments in early Islam. Ultimately, the question, did the Kaaba ever face Jerusalem, is perhaps imprecisely phrased. The Kaaba, as a physical structure, has always stood in Mecca. The more accurate inquiry concerns the direction Muslims faced in prayer. The exploration of this topic reveals much about the early Muslim community's relationship with other Abrahamic faiths, the evolving nature of Islamic rituals, and the interplay between religious doctrine and historical context. It underscores the importance of critical engagement with historical sources and the ongoing scholarly efforts to piece together the mosaic of early Islamic history, providing a richer, more textured understanding of the faith. Among the early Islamic historians whose work touches upon this complex issue is Muhammad ibn Umar al-Waqidi, who lived from 747 to 823 CE. Al-Waqidi's writings, though sometimes debated for their methodology, offer valuable insights into the historical memory of the early Muslim community. One particularly intriguing and somewhat controversial assertion attributed to him concerns the location of Al-Aqsa, often translated as the farthest mosque, mentioned in the Quran in the context of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey, Isra. While the overwhelming majority identify Al-Aqsa with Jerusalem, Al-Waqidi reportedly suggested a different geographical placement, which inevitably impacts the discussion about the Qibla. According to some interpretations of Al-Waqidi's accounts, the Al-Aqsa visited by the Prophet during his spiritual journey was not in Jerusalem, but rather a location known as Al-Ju'arna. situated near Mecca, approximately 18 miles northeast of the Holy City. Al-Waqidi is said to have described Al-Ju'arna as a place where the Prophet entered a state of ritual purity, ihram, to perform a pilgrimage to this farthest mosque, which was supposedly located across a wadi, valley, on a farther slope. This perspective, if accepted, would naturally lead to questions about the initial Qibla, as the traditional link between the first Qibla and Jerusalem is often tied to the sanctity of Al-Aqsa in that city. This alternative identification of Al-Aqsa by a figure like Al-Waqidi, even if it represents a minority view, highlights the diversity of thought in early Islamic scholarship. It suggests that the understanding of certain key religious narratives and geographical landmarks may not have been universally fixed from the very beginning. The implications of such a view are significant. If the Al-Aqsa of the Quran was indeed closer to Mecca, the argument for Jerusalem as the initial divinely sanctioned Qibla might require re-evaluation, or at least a more nuanced understanding of its basis. It opens up the possibility that the orientation toward Jerusalem had different underpinnings, or was perhaps a practice adopted for specific reasons during a particular phase. It is crucial to note that Al-Waqidi's views on this matter, as reported by later writers like the Saudi journalist Osama Yamani, are not the mainstream historical consensus. The vast body of Islamic tradition firmly places Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. However, the mere existence of such alternative historical claims, attributed to early figures, serves as a reminder of the dynamic process through which historical narratives are formed and solidified. It encourages a deeper dive into the sources and a consideration of the various threads of tradition that have contributed to the rich tapestry of Islamic history and its understanding of sacred geography. From a secular perspective, Al-Waqidi's accounts offer a fascinating glimpse into the historical and cultural context of early Islamic thought. They underscore the importance of examining historical narratives through a critical lens, recognizing the diversity of interpretations that have shaped our understanding of the past. The discussions surrounding the first Qibla are not confined to historical chronicles alone. Quranic commentators, Mufassirun, have also extensively deliberated on this matter, offering a range of interpretations based on their understanding of the relevant Quranic verses and supporting traditions. These commentaries provide a window into the theological reasoning and exegetical methods employed by scholars throughout Islamic history. One prominent commentator, Al-Qurtubi, in his comprehensive tafsir, Exegesis, summarized the differing opinions regarding the initial direction of prayer, showcasing the lack of a singular, unchallenged viewpoint even among classical scholars. Al-Qurtubi outlined two primary opinions on the first Qibla. The first and more widely known view is that the Prophet Muhammad, while in Mecca before the Hijrah, prayed towards the temple in Jerusalem, Bait al-Maqdis. This practice, according to this opinion, continued for the first 17 months after his migration to Medina, before Allah commanded him to turn towards the Kaaba in Mecca. This perspective emphasizes a period of shared orientation with other Abrahamic traditions, particularly Judaism, before the establishment of a distinct Islamic Qibla. It highlights a developmental aspect in the unfolding of Islamic ritual practice, guided by divine revelation. However, Al-Qurtubi also presented a second opinion, which he noted was considered correct by the scholar Abu Omar ibn Abd al-Barr. This alternative view proposed that the Prophet Muhammad was, from the very outset of his mission, commanded to pray towards the Kaaba According to this interpretation, he indeed prayed facing the Kaaba throughout his time in Mecca. It was only upon his arrival in Medina that he was, for a period, instructed to pray towards the temple in Jerusalem, before Allah ultimately redirected him back to the Kaaba. This view places a primary emphasis on the Kaaba's foundational role from the beginning, with the Jerusalem interlude being a temporary divine instruction. Further complicating the picture, some Quranic commentators, as cited in works like Tafsir al-Bidawi and Tafsir ibn Ajiba, explicitly refer to the Kaaba as the first of the two directions of prayer. This phrasing itself suggests a sequence but underscores the primacy of the Kaaba. Additionally, a tradition narrated by Ibn Abbas, a cousin of the Prophet and a highly respected early exegete, suggests a more complex sequence that the first Qibla was the Kaaba, referred to as the ancient house. Then it was changed to the temple in Jerusalem, and finally it was changed back to the Kaaba. Such varied interpretations demonstrate the scholarly engagement with the nuances of the historical and scriptural evidence available, as well as the cultural significance of these practices. The period of Prophet Muhammad's mission in Mecca, spanning approximately 13 years before the Hijrah to Medina, is crucial in understanding the early practices of the nascent Muslim community, including the direction of their prayer. During these formative years, the Muslims faced significant opposition and persecution. The prevailing narrative suggests that while in Mecca, the Prophet and his followers prayed towards Jerusalem. This choice is often interpreted as a gesture towards a shared Abrahamic heritage, acknowledging the sanctity of Jerusalem, a city revered by both Jews and Christians. This act could have also served to distinguish the early Muslims from the polytheistic practices prevalent in Mecca, which centered around the Kaaba, but included the worship of numerous idols. However, even within this narrative, there are subtleties. Some traditions suggest that while praying towards Jerusalem from Mecca, the Prophet would position himself in such a way that the Kaaba was also in front of him, between him and Jerusalem. This would have been possible if he stood to the south of the Kaaba. This detail, if accurate, indicates a deep-seated reverence for the Kaaba, even during the period when the formal Qibla was Jerusalem. It suggests an inner longing or a premonition of the Kaaba's eventual centrality in Islamic worship, reflecting its ancient status as the house of God built by Abraham and Ishmael. The Egyptian Dar al-Ifta, a prominent Islamic scholarly body, notes that while the Prophet Muhammad prayed towards Jerusalem during his time in Mecca and for the initial period in Medina, his heart was intrinsically inclined towards the Kaaba. He reportedly hoped and yearned for the Qibla to be changed to this ancient sanctuary in his hometown. This yearning is often cited in conjunction with the Quranic verses that eventually mandated the change, suggesting that the divine decree was, in a sense, an answer to the Prophet's heartfelt desire and a confirmation of the Kaaba's ultimate significance for the Muslim Ummah community. The focus on Jerusalem during the Meccan period, therefore, can be seen not as a negation of the Kaaba's importance, but perhaps as a temporary phase with its own wisdom and purpose. It might have served to purify the concept of monotheism, detaching it from the then idol-laden Kaaba in the minds of the early believers, and to create a connection with the older monotheistic traditions. The anticipation of a return to the Kaaba, however, seems to have been a persistent undercurrent, reflecting its deep spiritual resonance as the primordial house of worship dedicated to the one God, awaiting its restoration to its original Abrahamic purity. Beyond religious practices, this period was also marked by significant cultural and economic shifts in Mecca. The city was a bustling trade hub with its strategic location on ancient trade routes. These shifts influenced the social dynamics and cultural evolution of the region, setting the stage for the transformative events that would follow. The political landscape of Mecca was also evolving, with various tribes vying for power and influence, further adding to the anticipation and tension of the time. Section 5. The Medinan Interlude Facing Jerusalem. Upon the Prophet Muhammad's migration or Hijrah to Medina in 622 CE, the practice of praying towards Jerusalem continued. Medina, then known as Yathrib, had a significant Jewish population, and the continuation of this Qibla for the first 17 months. Some sources vary slightly on the duration, is often seen in this context. This period in Medina was a time of community building, establishing new social and political structures, and further defining Islamic practices. Praying towards Jerusalem could have initially fostered a sense of common ground, or at least a point of reference with the Jewish tribes of Medina, who also held Jerusalem sacred and prayed in its direction. The decision to maintain Jerusalem as the Qibla upon arriving in Medina, despite the Prophet's personal inclination towards the Kaaba, underscores the principle of obedience to divine guidance in Islam. Even if his heart longed for Mecca, the practice was dictated by what was understood to be the current divine instruction. This period highlights the formative stages of Islamic ritual law, where practices were being established and sometimes refined through revelation. The Muslim community, now growing in numbers and strength in Medina, looked to the Prophet for guidance in all matters of faith and practice, and the Qibla was a central element of their daily worship. However, this shared direction of prayer with the Jewish community in Medina also became a point of contention or discussion. Some historical accounts suggest that members of the Jewish tribes would sometimes remark on the Muslims praying towards their Qibla, which may have created a sense of unease or a desire for a distinct religious identity among some Muslims. The Prophet's own longing for the Kaaba, as mentioned earlier, likely intensified during this period as he looked towards heaven, awaiting a new directive. This anticipation was not just a personal wish, but perhaps also reflected a broader communal desire for a unique symbol of their faith. The experience in Medina was transformative for the Muslim community. It was here that Islam began to flourish as a distinct religio-political entity. The eventual change of the Qibla away from Jerusalem and towards Mecca was therefore not just a ritualistic adjustment, but a profoundly symbolic act. It signified the maturation of the Muslim Ummah, its unique connection to the Abrahamic tradition through the Kaaba, and its distinct path forward. The Medinan interlude of facing Jerusalem thus serves as a crucial chapter in the story of the Qibla, setting the stage for the definitive turn towards Mecca. Section 6. Divine Guidance, the Quranic Revelation, and the Turn to Mecca. The pivotal moment in the history of the Qibla came with a direct divine revelation enshrined in the Quran, commanding the Prophet Muhammad and the Muslim community to change their direction of prayer from Jerusalem to the Kaaba in Mecca. This event is specifically mentioned in the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 142 to 144 and 149 to 150. These verses not only decree the change, but also address the potential reactions and questions that might arise from this shift, emphasizing that true guidance and righteousness lie in obedience to God's commands, irrespective of the direction. Verse 2. 144 is particularly poignant. We have certainly seen the turning of your face, see, O Muhammad, toward the heaven, and we will surely turn you to a Qibla with which you will be pleased. So turn your face toward Al-Masjid Al-Haram, and wherever you believers are, turn your faces toward it in prayer. This verse explicitly acknowledges the Prophet's anticipation and desire for this change, framing the new Qibla as a divine favor and a source of contentment for him and his followers. The instruction is clear and unequivocal, establishing the Kaaba, Al-Masjid Al-Haram, the sacred mosque, as the definitive and permanent Qibla for all Muslims. The timing of this revelation, occurring on the 15th of Shaban in the second year after Hijrah, approximately 624 CE, according to many traditions, was significant. It took place in Medina at a mosque now known as Masjid al-Qiblatain, the Mosque of the Two Qiblas, so named because the congregation is said to have physically turned mid-prayer upon receiving the news of the new command. This dramatic event underscored the immediacy and importance of adhering to divine instruction. The change also served to further distinguish the Muslim community, providing them with a unique focal point for their worship that was deeply rooted in their own prophetic heritage, tracing back to Abraham. The Quranic verses surrounding the change also address the potential criticisms from the foolish among the people, Quran 2:142, who might question this shift. The Quran responds by asserting that to Allah belong the East and the West. He guides whom He wills to a straight path. This emphasizes that all directions belong to God, and the choice of a specific Qibla is a divine prerogative, a test of faith, and a means of unifying the believers. The shift to the Kaaba was thus not merely a geographical reorientation, but a profound theological statement about God's sovereignty and the nature of true submission. Historically, this change also marked a significant cultural and political shift, solidifying Mecca's central role in the Islamic world and influencing the socio-political landscape of the region. Section 7. Jerusalem's grand edifice, the Dome of the Rock and its motivations. While the Qibla for Muslims was firmly established towards Mecca, Jerusalem continued to hold significant religious importance in Islam, primarily due to its association with previous prophets and the Prophet Muhammad's night journey, Isra and Ascension, Miraj. A prominent Islamic monument in Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock, Qubbat al-Sakra, often becomes part of discussions relating to Jerusalem's sanctity. Though its construction occurred decades after the Qibla was fixed towards Mecca, built in 691 CE by the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, its purpose and symbolism have been subjects of considerable scholarly discussion, sometimes intersecting with debates about early Islamic political and religious priorities. One historical perspective, notably advanced by the 9th century Shiite Arab historian Muhammad al-Yaqrubi, and echoed by some modern commentators like Osama Yamani, suggests a political motivation behind the Dome of the Rock's grand construction. During this period, Mecca was under the control of a rival caliph, Abdallah ibn al-Zubayr, who had rebelled against Umayyad rule. This situation made it difficult, if not impossible, for pilgrims from Umayyad-controlled territories, particularly Syria, to perform the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. Consequently, it is argued that Abd al-Malik may have built the Dome of the Rock as an alternative or rival sanctuary to divert pilgrims and enhance the prestige of Jerusalem and his own caliphate. This interpretation posits that the Umayyad Caliph sought to create a magnificent religious edifice in Jerusalem, a city already revered, to serve as a focal point for Muslims under his domain, thereby diminishing the religious and political leverage held by Ibn al-Zubayr in Mecca. The Dome of the Rock, with its stunning architecture and inscriptions, was undoubtedly intended to be a powerful statement. Its location on the Temple Mount, a site sacred to Jews and Christians, also asserted the ascendance and permanence of Islam. If this political motivation was primary, it highlights how rulers could utilize religious sentiment and monumental architecture for strategic purposes. However, it is also important to acknowledge other interpretations that emphasize the purely religious motivations behind the Dome of the Rock's construction. Scholars point to the inscriptions within the dome, which include Quranic verses affirming Islamic doctrines, particularly the oneness of God and the prophethood of Jesus, as a message to both Muslims and non-Muslims. The structure commemorates the site from which the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to heaven. Thus, while political considerations might have played a role, the dome also served to solidify Jerusalem's status as the third holiest city in Islam after Mecca and Medina, without intending to replace the Kaaba as the Qibla or the Hajj destination. Beyond its religious significance, the Dome of the Rock stands as a testament to the architectural and cultural achievements of the Umayyad period. The structure's intricate design and the use of mosaics reflect the artistic influences and craftsmanship of the time, blending Byzantine and Persian elements. As a cultural landmark, the Dome of the Rock has inspired countless works of art, literature, and scholarship, making it a symbol of Jerusalem's rich and diverse history. Its enduring presence continues to attract visitors from around the world, serving as a bridge between the past and the present, and a reminder of the city's enduring significance across different cultures and eras. Section 8. The unwavering heart, the Kaaba's centrality in Islamic faith. Regardless of the historical debates surrounding the initial Qibla or the political context of other sacred sites, the Kaaba in Mecca holds an unparalleled and central position in Islamic faith and practice. It is considered by Muslims to be the Baytullah, the house of God, and the first mosque established on earth for the worship of the one God, traditionally believed to have been built by Prophet Abraham and his son Ishmael. This ancient lineage imbues the Kaaba with profound spiritual significance, connecting Muslims directly to the primordial monotheistic tradition. Its role is not merely as a direction for prayer, but as a symbol of unity and the core of Islamic monotheism, Tawhid. The Quran itself emphasizes the ancient sanctity of the Kaaba. For instance, Surah Al-Imran 396 states, "Indeed, the first house of worship established for mankind was that at Mecca, blessed and a guidance for the worlds." This verse, among others, reinforces the idea that the Kaaba's significance predates even the mission of Prophet Muhammad, positioning it as a timeless center for divine worship. The rituals of Hajj, the major pilgrimage, and Umrah, the minor pilgrimage, which revolve around the Kaaba and its precincts, further underscore its pivotal role, drawing millions of Muslims from across the globe each year in a powerful display of devotion and unity. The change of the Qibla to the Kaaba, as ordained by God, is seen as a definitive act that cemented its status as the spiritual heart of the Muslim Ummah. It provided a distinct and unifying focus for a global community, transcending geographical, cultural, and ethnic differences. Every prayer offered by a Muslim 5 times a day is directed towards this single point, fostering a collective consciousness and a shared identity. This orientation is not an act of worshiping the Kaaba itself, as Islam strictly prohibits the worship of any created object, but rather a worship of God in the direction He has commanded, a direction that symbolizes the unity of His dominion and the submission of His creation. Therefore, while scholarly discussions about the historical trajectory of the Qibla are valuable for a comprehensive understanding of early Islamic history, they do not diminish the Kaaba's ultimate and enduring religious significance. Its centrality is woven into the very fabric of Islamic belief and ritual. The Kaaba stands as a powerful testament to the Abrahamic roots of Islam, the continuity of monotheistic worship, and the unifying principle of Tawheed that lies at the core of the Muslim faith, a beacon calling humanity towards the singular worship of the Creator. Section 9. Sanctity, Politics and Perception, Understanding Sacred Spaces. The discussions surrounding the Qibla, the location of Al-Aqsa, and the construction of the Dome of the Rock inevitably bring to light the complex interplay between religious sanctity, political motivations, and human perception of sacred spaces. Throughout history, sites imbued with religious significance have often become focal points for communal identity, devotion, and, at times, contention. The way these sites are understood and venerated can be shaped not only by foundational religious texts and traditions, but also by the historical, social, and political context in which communities interpret and interact with them. This is evident in the varying historical accounts and scholarly opinions regarding Islam's early holy sites. The argument, for instance, that the attribution of sanctity to particular places, such as Jerusalem and the present-day Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, might sometimes be influenced by political factors, as suggested by commentators like Osama Yamani, points to this intricate relationship. Yamani highlighted that Jerusalem was known by names like Ilya or Alia during the Prophet Muhammad's time, not Al-Quds, and that the later emphasis on its sanctity could have been amplified by political dynamics, such as the Umayyad Caliphate situation. This does not necessarily negate the genuine religious reverence many feel, but adds a layer of historical analysis to how such reverence is expressed and institutionalized. The construction of magnificent religious monuments like the Dome of the Rock often served multiple purposes. While they undoubtedly expressed piety and commemorated significant religious events, they also functioned as powerful symbols of authority, identity, and cultural achievement for the rulers and empires that commissioned them. Understanding these dual roles, religious and socio-political, is crucial for a nuanced appreciation of sacred architecture and the historical narratives surrounding sacred sites. The perception of a site's holiness can thus be reinforced or even strategically amplified through such grand undertakings, shaping collective memory and devotional practices for generations. In conclusion, the story of the Qibla and the significance of holy sites in Islam demonstrate that while core religious tenets provide foundational meaning, the historical unfolding and human understanding of these tenets can be multifaceted. The Kaaba's position as the ultimate Qibla remains an undisputed cornerstone of Islamic faith, symbolizing unity and submission to God. However, acknowledging the historical debates, the diverse interpretations, and the potential influence of political factors on the perception and prominence of other sacred locations allows for a richer, more critically informed understanding of religious history. It reminds us that faith is lived and expressed within the dynamic currents of human experience, and that sacred spaces also hold immense historical and cultural significance, reflecting the diverse ways in which human societies have sought to understand and commemorate their beliefs and values.